Welcome, and thank you all for being here. For those of you who do not know me, I am Eddie Weeks, your legislative librarian. Your legislative library is just across the hall here in Suite 804. Please stop by and say hi at any time. I'm there to answer just about any historical question you might have about the legislature, old laws, past legislators, prior legislation, the legislative process, and even what is the history of Prohibition in the state of Tennessee? What a great question. Let's start our answer to that question in 1779. Yep, 1779, before the state of Tennessee, but there was a state of North Carolina, whose western lands would later become the state of Tennessee. This is 1779, North Carolina, Chapter 10, an act for regulating ordinaries, houses of entertainment, and ferries. An ordinary is a restaurant, but for an ordinary to sell liquor, it had to have a license. And note that the penalty for not having one is 50 pounds. We're still under the British monetary system. So, to sell liquor in your ordinary, you had to apply for a license from the county court. The license was granted unless it appear to the said court that the person so applying is a person of gross immorality or of such poor circumstance and slender credit that they think him or her not able to comply with the intentions of this act. Tennessee became a state in 1796 and adopted many of the existing North Carolina laws as its own. Soon, though, the state was making its own alcohol laws, such as this one, 1813, Chapter 135, to suppress tippling shops. A tippling shop is sort of like a bar today for drinking on premises. Note what this one's about, though. No selling alcohol to slaves. This is 1823, Chapter 25, to preserve the purity of elections. It is contrary to the spirit of the Constitution of this state and beneath the dignity of a free people for their candidates for offices of honor or trust to be giving meat, money, or drink to the electors for their friendship or support. If any person offering himself as a candidate be guilty of treating the electors with spirituous liquors for the purpose of obtaining their votes, such person shall be fined $100. It is sadly unknown how much spirituous liquors were required to buy a vote, or how the voters so obtained were to remember which candidate had provided the spirituous liquor. On the other hand, 1827, Chapter 15, authorized persons at whose houses elections and musters are held to sell spirituous liquors at their home on the day of the election. Now, I'm not saying they had a great idea for increasing voter turnout, but by the 1830s, there was a growing prohibitionist movement in America. The American Temperance Society had been formed in Massachusetts in 1826, and its popularity was increasing. The thing to remember is that the prohibitionists were anti-alcohol and the anti-prohibitionists were pro-alcohol. Anyway, 1831, Chapter 80, was to tax the retailers of spirituous liquors. That hereafter, any person wishing to retail spirituous liquors in this state is hereby authorized to apply to the clerk of the county for a license for that purpose. And said clerk is hereby authorized and required to issue to such person so applying a license. Any person. That gross immorality clause was gone. The clerk of the court was now required to issue a license to any person who paid a $15 fee. That law lasted 1 year. 1832, Chapter 34, the next year, was an act to amend and explain the previous act. That no public housekeeper or other person whatever shall hereafter retail spirituous liquors in less quantities than 1 quart, unless he shall first obtain a license for that purpose. In short, you could not sell spirituous liquors for use on premises unless you had a special license and took an oath to uphold the law. That law lasted about 5 years, and then the Prohibitionist movement reached Tennessee. 1838, Chapter 120, to repeal all laws licensing tippling houses. The Tennessee Supreme Court explained this act in the case of Dyer v. the State in these terms. The Act of 1838 operates virtually as a repeal of all laws authorizing a license to retail spirituous liquors because it makes all retailing without exception a misdemeanor, indictable and punishable by a fine at the discretion of the court. The court then gave a history of liquor laws in Tennessee. Inasmuch as the legislature had tried to obviate the evils resulting from the license to retail spirituous liquors by the restrictions of character and occupation, until it was found to be of no avail, then having extended the right without restriction to every person until it was found at the expiration of 1 short year that they were again compelled to resort to them, and that finding at last that oaths and obligations could not remove the dangers and difficulties arising from the passage of the Act of 1831, it was deemed expedient to put a stop to the practice of retailing spirituous liquors altogether. History.com summed it up with these words. January 26, 1838, Tennessee passes nation's first Prohibition law. Prohibition had come to Tennessee. Prohibition lasted less than a decade. 1846, Chapter 90, was an act to tax and regulate tippling and tippling houses, that it shall and may be lawful for any person or persons to vend or sell spirituous or vinous liquors by any quantity the purchaser or purchasers may desire, with the following conditions. One of those conditions was that all incorporated towns could now impose a tax on all tippling houses located in that town. Another condition was that free persons of color could not get a license, nor could anyone found guilty of an infamous crime, and that vinous and spirituous liquors could not be sold on Sundays. There were many more conditions. Liquor could be sold for off-premises consumption, but no one could have more than 1 place under 1 license, and no one could sell to any minor after receiving written notice from the parent or guardian of that minor. So liquor was again legal, but the prohibitionist forces were not done yet. 10 years after Prohibition was first enacted, and 2 years after its repeal, 1848, Chapter 93, incorporated the Grand Division of the Sons of Temperance of Tennessee. Not to be outdone, 1848, Chapter 177 incorporated the Grand Division of the Sisters of Temperance of Tennessee. Temperance societies had been active since the 1820s, but now they had reached Tennessee. To be a member, you took a pledge to abstain from distilled beverages. The Prohibition movement was growing, and now they had a new tool: propaganda. The Athens Post, August 30th, 1850. Devil, death, and company, wholesale and retail dealers in spirits, take this opportunity of informing their friends and a discerning public that they continue the trade of making drunkards, bankrupts, beggars, and maniacs on the most reasonable terms at the shortest notice. This completely unbiased article continued. Devil, death, and company beg to assure the public that the article in which they deal is the best and most pleasant poison in the world and has never been known to fail in any instance. In order to do business in a respectable style, the advertisers have obtained a license from the state, under whose benevolent auspices they are legally authorized to bring the wives and families of their customers to misery, and to wound, maim, and beggar, and drive to delirium and death as many as the public good requires. Temperance societies continued to grow and to celebrate their existence. The Athens Post, April 11th, 1851. The Madisonville Division, number 268 of the Sons of Temperance, will celebrate their second anniversary on the 14th day of April by public procession and an address by William G. Brownlow. William G. Brownlow became Governor William G. Brownlow 15 years later, in 1865. In times of war, the law falls silent. I can find very little alcohol or prohibition-related legislation from just before the Civil War through Reconstruction. It seems they had other priorities at this time. But I did find a couple of amazing laws. 1860, Chapter 81, that the alteration of spirituous or vinous liquors by the use of strychnine or other poisonous liquors or ingredients shall be, and the same is hereby declared a felony. 1869, Chapter 22 is also an interesting one, that no liquor shop in this state shall be kept open on election days, nor shall anyone on said days give or sell intoxicating liquors to any person for any purpose at or near an election ground. So, we've gone from selling liquor at the polling place on election day in 1827 to no liquor being sold anywhere on election day 42 years later. In 1870, Tennessee gained a new constitution, and the times they were a-changin'. The Women's Christian Temperance Union held their first national meeting in Cleveland, Ohio in 1874. Local temperance unions formed in Tennessee in 1875, and in 1877, the 40th General Assembly of the state of Tennessee passed 1877, Chapter 23, the 4-mile law, that it shall not be lawful for any person to sell or tipple any intoxicating beverage within 4 miles of an incorporated institution of learning in this state. And then came Section 2 of this act, that this act shall not apply to the sale of such liquors within the limits of any incorporated town, nor to sales made by persons having licenses to make the same at the date of the passage of this act during the time for which such licenses were granted, nor to sales by manufactories of such liquors in wholesale packages or quantities. They really could have just stopped with, this act shall not apply. But the key is that the act does not apply within incorporated towns. This was the camel's nose that brought the Prohibition camel into Tennessee. 4 years later, 1881, Chapter 90, was to prevent the sale, giving, or delivering liquors to minors. that it shall be unlawful for any person engaged regularly or otherwise in the manufacture or sale of any spirituous, vinous, malt, or mixed liquors, their employees, agents, servants, or other persons for them knowingly to sell, give, furnish to, or procure for any person under the age of 21 years any spirituous, vinous, or malt liquors without the written consent of the father and mother of such minor, or, if the minor be away at school, then the written consent of the principal or person in charge of such school. 21 years of age, and you better be friends with your principal. 4 years later, 1885, Chapter 123 amended that 4 Mile Law, now prohibiting the sale of intoxicating bitters. Always look for the loophole. The only exception again was in incorporated towns and cities. 1887, Chapter 167, further amended the 4 Mile Law to make it clear that it didn't matter if the school was in session or not. You could not sell or tipple any intoxicating beverage within 4 miles of any school. And then there was still that Section 2 of the Act, that this Act shall not apply to the sale of such liquors within the limits of any incorporated town, nor to sales made by persons having licenses to make the same at the date of the passage of this Act during the time for which such licenses were granted, nor to sales by manufactories of such liquors in wholesale packages or quantities. But there were other limits that they could add. 1889, Chapter 31 was to prohibit the sale on Sunday of any malt, vinous, fermented, or other intoxicating liquors, or to keep open on Sunday any place where such liquors are sold or dispensed. The same year, 1889, Chapter 68 was to prevent the selling, giving, furnishing to, or procuring for any husband who is an habitual drunkard of any intoxicating liquor by anyone having been served with a written notice prohibitory thereof, signed by the wife of such husband. In 1899, the 4 Mile Law was again amended, this time by Chapter 221. Instead of not being applicable in any incorporated town or city, it was now applicable in towns of less than 2,000 people. Hereafter incorporated. That is, the law now applied to newly incorporated towns of less than 2,000 citizens. Consequently, small towns all across Tennessee surrendered their charters and reincorporated, falling under this law and becoming dry. Liquor was soon sold only in towns or cities with over 2,000 inhabitants. 1903, Chapter 2 then amended the 4 Mile Law to make it not applicable in towns of over 5,000, hereafter incorporated. Small towns all across Tennessee were now becoming dry. But the larger cities still had alcohol, including the state capital city of Nashville, a fact which attracted some attention in 1901. 1901, Chapter 107, an act to prohibit the sale or giving away of liquors, wines, or beer within the Capitol building or in or upon the Capitol grounds. You may wonder what prompted such an unexpected law. The Columbia Herald, February the 1st, 1901. A sensation was caused in the Senate yesterday morning when Senator Cox presented a bill prohibiting the sale or giving away of liquor at the state capitol. The bill was introduced as it is claimed that there has been a bounteous dispensing of free beverage within the Capitol building. The Johnson City Comet, February 7th, 1901, added, "This measure was in consequence of the notorious fact that a tiger, more or less blind, but plainly visible to those statesmen, visitors, and habitués of the Capitol who knew where to look." Let me pause there for just a moment to explain that a blind tiger is a term for an illegal bar. And let me add that I am certain it is a complete coincidence that the mascot for the Tennessee School for the Blind, created by the legislature, is in fact a blind tiger. Regardless, the article continued that the blind tiger inside the Capitol was known to exist in some out-of-the-way place in the building. It is said that this booze joint was regularly supplied with thirst annihilators and was, in fact, a regular thirst store. Not so attractive, perhaps, as some of the downtown resorts, but convenient just the same. The Savannah Courier, on April 5th, 1901, then added, "Since the passage of the law prohibiting the giving away of liquor at the Capitol, it is a hard matter to keep enough legislators present to transact business." The Senate sponsor of this bill, Senator John Cox, became Governor John Cox in 1905. And in 1907, Chapter 17 again amended the 4-mile law. The only place the law did not apply now was in cities and towns of over 150,000 and in the small town of La Follette in Campbell County, the one remaining small town in Tennessee that had never surrendered its charter. Would anything ever happen to change the law, to remove the cells in those final 4 towns? On November 9th, 1908, former United States Senator and staunch prohibitionist Edward Ward Carmack was shot and killed on the streets of Nashville by Duncan Cooper and Robin Cooper, members of the anti-prohibitionist forces, which would be a great topic for another Lunch and Learn sometime. But this was November 1908, 2 months before the 56th General Assembly took office. And that General Assembly quickly took action. 1909, Senate Bill 1 was to prohibit the sale of intoxicating liquors as a beverage near any schoolhouse anywhere. 1909, Senate Bill 11 was to prohibit the manufacture of intoxicating liquors for the purpose of sale. Governor Malcolm Patterson, an anti-prohibitionist, quickly sent the General Assembly a message. As governor, I transmit the following message for your consideration on the liquor question. Prohibition is fundamentally and profoundly wrong as a governmental policy, and in a country where the largest measure of freedom of action is accorded the individual, it becomes intolerable. The governor then described the current situation and the cities that had gone dry by reincorporating. In no single instance was a charter abolished without consent. In 1907, the 4-mile law was extended to the entire state. Under this law, Knoxville, Bristol, Jackson, Columbia, and several other towns surrendered their charters. At this time, there are only 4 places in Tennessee where liquor is legally sold, to wit, La Follette, Chattanooga, Nashville, and Memphis. An obnoxious, undesirable, and punitive law will bring forth an ugly brood, and nothing good or true or lasting can come of it. Whatever you may do, I cannot question your power, and the sole responsibility is yours. But from me as governor, you have a message of truth, and my duty is done. Despite the governor's objections, the General Assembly passed both bills, and both were vetoed by Governor Malcolm Patterson. The General Assembly then passed each bill over the governor's veto, making them 1909, Chapter 1, to prohibit the sale of intoxicating liquors, notwithstanding the objections or veto of the governor, and 1909, Chapter 10, to prohibit the manufacture in this state of intoxicating liquors for the purpose of sale, notwithstanding the objections or veto of the governor. So, the manufacture in this state and the sale in this state of intoxicating liquors was illegal, but not the possession, use, or transportation. Less than a decade later, 1917, Chapter 12, prohibiting the receipt of intoxicating liquors from a common or other carrier, prohibiting the possession of such liquors hereafter received from a common or other carrier, and prohibiting the shipment and personal transportation of such liquors into this state or between points within this state, whether for personal use or otherwise. The act was clear that it shall be unlawful for any person, form, or corporation to possess intoxicating liquors, including wine, ale, and beer, hereafter received directly or indirectly from a common or other carrier in this state, whether intended for personal use or otherwise, and whether interstate or intrastate shipments or transportation. The nickname of this act was Bone Dry. The Lexington Progress, February 9, 1917, Bone Dry Bill signed by Governor. The Bone Dry Law, the most far-reaching of all the anti-liquor legislation enacted by the Tennessee legislature, was signed by Governor Thomas Rye before the legislature adjourned last Friday. That article explained, druggists will still be allowed to use alcoholic spirits in their business. Such spirits can be used in the arts, and churches will still be allowed to obtain the necessary wine for sacramental purposes. The object of the law is to utterly destroy the use of intoxicating liquors as a beverage. That article ended. If this law is enforced, Tennessee will at last have real prohibition. The Camden Chronicle, February 9, 1917. What is known as the Bone Dry Bill is now law. It is the most drastic prohibition law ever enacted by any state. The bill forbids the bringing of whiskey into Tennessee to be used as a beverage. The law means further that liquor can only be used as medicine and under medical regulations. Other newspapers, though, had a bit more fun with the act. The Morgan County Press, February 15, 1917. It's bone dry, but don't you cry. Your thirst will mellow down, and after a while there'll be a smile where all is now a frown. It's bone dry, but hush your cry. The snakes will not be bad. Take this from me, that you will see will not always be sad. It's bone dry, but do not sigh as truth begins to dawn. But let us hope, in spite of dope, there's dampness further on. It's bone dry, but let us try to stiffen an upper lip, and some sweet day we'll slip away and find a little nip. The dampness of that sweet day, though, seemed far, far away. In December 1917, Congress passed and sent to the states a proposed 18th Amendment to the federal Constitution. After 1 year from the ratification of this article, the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors within, the importation thereof into, or exportation thereof from the United States, and all territories subject to the jurisdiction thereof, for beverage purposes, is hereby prohibited. The proposed amendment was ratified in January 1919, and on January 16, 1920, America entered Prohibition, following in the footsteps of the state of Tennessee. Like Tennessee's Prohibition from the 1800s, national Prohibition lasted about a decade. The 21st Amendment to the Federal Constitution was ratified on June 14, 1933, repealing the 18th Amendment and ending Prohibition in America. Alcohol began to legally return to places it was once forbidden, including one certain building. The Nashville Banner, April 15th, 1933. Operator of lunch stand in Capitol plans to sell beer. I haven't asked them about it, but I think they'll let me. I sell near beer and soda pop, and beer will be as legal as either of those. The state, though, had a few other legalization laws to pass. 1939, Chapter 49, was an act to legalize, regulate, and control the manufacture, sale, receipt, possession, storage, transportation, and distribution of, and traffic in alcoholic beverages in counties and municipalities of this state after local option elections are held. Local option was in and Prohibition was over. It may seem so strange to us today, in a time when the two most well-known Tennesseans worldwide are probably Elvis Presley and Jack Daniel, at a time when Tennessee whiskey is actually defined in statute, but there was a time when Prohibition was the law in Tennessee. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all of my time. Thank you for your time.